Part 2. The Special Handling of Ordinary Reality. Practices for the Right Side. Chapter 3. The Body as a Field of Energy, or the Way to Personal Power. Energy. For Don Juan, as well as his apprentice Carlos, the world is not made up of solid objects, such as we perceive them, but rather of fields of energy, an idea in accord with the latest theories of modern physics. The idea of energy is one of the fundamental themes of Don Juanist thinking and practice. It is fundamental not only because it appears frequently in his work, but because it also constitutes both the point of departure and the point of arrival for everything a warrior does. Don Juan says that the world of desires or ideas has little real influence on the lives of people. Rather, it is energy or personal power, the energy at our disposal, that determines everything, the possible and the impossible. As he says in Journey to Ixtlan, a man is no more than the sum of his personal power. Light or ego. In The Fire from Within, Castaneda alludes to a central theme that he calls the mastery of awareness. He states that among its essential elements is the fact that we are, in reality, fields of energy, or luminous eggs. This may not appear to be a great secret, but within this idea exists one of the central elements that sustains the entire system of practices put forth by Don Juan. It is not difficult to comprehend that everything we do requires energy. Not a single act can be accomplished without the necessary amount. Be it running the Mexico City Marathon, breaking an old habit, or simply getting out of bed in the morning. Although everyone has energy, we find that average people's energy is totally consumed in the routine acts of their lives, as determined entirely by their past. All of our energy in ordinary life is already invested within the confines of the known, leaving nothing for the exploration of the unknown. Any new undertaking on our part, if it is outside what we normally do, requires free or available energy to accomplish. This is the reason for the enormous difficulty facing an ordinary person wishing to change or to create situations distinct from those that make up the normal in his or her life. There is no energy available. On the other hand, anything undertaken on the path of knowledge will necessarily be concerned with energy. Warriors know that to venture into the unknown, with all the changes to be made, requires not only a high level of energy, but also a high level of available energy. Thus, they examine everything having to do with energy. This is part of the secret of luminous beings. We are energy, and all of our acts imply either a saving or a wasting of this life energy. Warriors know that each act either fortifies or weakens their energy, and become very careful about the nature of their actions, striving always for impeccability, the optimum use of energy. The key to the matter is this: if we stop perceiving ourselves as egos, accepting instead that we are fields of energy, then not only will we have to change the way we view reality, our way of behaving in it will tend to change as well. As egos, we feel compelled to defend and reaffirm an enormous number of actions in the name of the ego. As fields of energy, on the other hand, our attention must be placed on how we use that energy, on whether it is increasing or decreasing. Therefore, our actions will tend to orient themselves toward the appropriate use of energy. Impeccability, known also as the seal of a warrior. As a simple and concrete example, take the case of a man whose ego reacts with frustration and anger because his wife did not have dinner ready when he got home from work. As an ego, he feels offended, since the ego demands worship and that everyone take as the truth all that he believes about himself. Therefore, he will yell and threaten his wife, looking for her acceptance that the very important ego of her husband deserves to be treated with more consideration. If he gets it, she will cry or beg for forgiveness, or she will prepare dinner in a state of hurry and anguish. In a covert way, she will be expressing to the ego of her husband, not his real self, "Yes, I believe you exist and you are real. I also believe everything you say and tell me about yourself is true." Evidently, this occurs because each time the ego fails to receive confirmation from external reality, as happened continually, it begins to have serious doubts about its own validity and therefore feels threatened. Thus, it strives, through means endowed by personal history, to manipulate reality and the people around it until they are obligated to agree that the ego exists. It will become angry, offended, depressed, and even threaten suicide until it achieves the desired confirmation. Since it knows it has no concrete substance, it looks incessantly for confirmation from other human beings, those habitually occupied with similar matters, who accept and act as though the ego in question exists and represents the real person. Only in this way can the ego fool itself and make itself believe that it exists, although at heart it knows what it really is: a specific mass of nothing. None of this can occur when we act in agreement with the knowledge of what we really are: a field of energy. The man in our story would proceed in a different way if he were to perceive himself as a field of energy. As such, his first concern would entail the optimum use of his energy. He would know that anger consumes an enormous amount of energy while contributing nothing save weakness, bad health, and poor quality of life, factors that do not constitute appropriate or desirable use of his energy. Thus, in place of uselessly wasting his energy, he will consider his options: waiting quietly while dinner is prepared, or perhaps assisting in its preparation. Personal power. Don Juan's insistence that everything a person does or does not do, can or cannot do, that occurs or does not occur, depends on his or her personal power, is an idea congruent with the standard basic conduct of a warrior: impeccability. To say that warriors are always impeccable refers to their persistent search for the best possible use of their energy. Concerning our nature as a field of energy, we can postulate the following basic premises. Everything living beings do, and everything that happens to them, is determined by their level of energy, or personal power. The level of energy of all beings depends on three fundamental factors: the amount of energy with which they were conceived, the manner in which the energy has been utilized since birth, and the way in which it is being used at the present time. The form in which an ordinary person utilizes energy is not a product of chance or of choice. Rather, it is determined by his or her past. Although normally men and women consume all of their energy performing the routines dictated by their personal history, it is possible for them to make the following fundamental changes in their condition as fields of energy: redirect energy, save energy, increase energy. Everything that applies to human beings in relation to personal power applies to all living beings, since they are all fields of energy. Everything living beings do and everything that happens to them is determined by their level of energy or personal power. Most of the time, ordinary people believe that the events of their life are determined by factors that are out of their control, because the events are physically removed from them, or because they are supposedly characteristic, intrinsically part of a person, ego. Thus, we frequently hear people speaking of their bad luck as though it were something happening independent of themselves. They feel that events, especially those that are unpleasant, are against them because someone is doing something to them. Or if they assume the problem stems from themselves, they will speak of the things they can't control. That's just the way I am. I have no willpower. I have an explosive character. In the same way, the enormous expenditure of energy involved in making unrealistic decisions and in feeling despair when they are not carried out is a phenomenon difficult to understand. If I was so sure yesterday that I would get up and exercise, why don't I have the slightest desire to do so today? It is as though I am dealing with two different people. In a case like this, a person will usually say, "The trouble is, I have no willpower." And this explanation would not be so far from the truth if we understood will as it is understood by a sorcerer: an accumulation of available energy. An ordinary person, nevertheless, believes that willpower is a characteristic of personality that one either possesses or not, which cannot be developed at will. The thinking of Don Juan is very different. Everything that happens to us depends on our personal power, and whether we have it or not depends entirely on ourselves. Good or bad health, good or bad luck, available affection and love. Doors open for us, doors which remain closed. Basically, we can say that those who possess a high degree of energy lead sound, healthy lives, unless their energy is out of control. While the lives of those with a low energy level, the majority of humanity, will often be gray and painful. It would not be an exaggeration to say that those who have energy can accomplish anything, while those who lack it will always be poor, even though they may be swimming in material wealth. The origin of personal power. The level of energy of all beings depends on three fundamental factors: the amount of energy with which they were conceived, the manner in which the energy has been utilized since birth, and the way in which it is being used at the present time. All human beings possess characteristics inherited from their ancestors, primarily their parents, although there are also characteristics from grandparents and farther back. The influence of ancestors is much less the farther one gets from the generation in question. This refers not only to physical, biological, or physiological characteristics, but also to energy levels as well. We inherit both biological and energetic characteristics from our parents. The first important factor is how much energy do the parents have? And second, how much of that goes to the new being they created at the moment of conception? In a conversation with Carlos Castaneda, he told me that Don Juan explained this very simply. If a person had been conceived with a great deal of passion, a large quantity of energy would be conveyed to the new being, and he or she would be born strong. On the contrary, if conception takes place among highly civilized people, perhaps after many years of marriage, with the television turned on, or, as Carlos put it, is a product of very boring sex, the level of energy at birth would be correspondingly low. Fortunately, energetic inheritance is not the only factor determining our energy level in life. It is also determined by how we use said inheritance, be it meager or plentiful. Thus, those born with little energy, but who make optimum use of what they have, will be better off than someone with much energy, but who lives out of control. In the first case, persons born with little energy, whether they express it to themselves in these words or not, start on the path of the warrior, which allows them to increase their level of energy. In the second case, people are born with a great deal of energy, but have used it only to satisfy their whims and personal importance, which little by little wears away at their level of energy. These people get what they want with little effort, or manipulate with ease the people around them, while giving nothing in exchange. They are accustomed to being loved, but not to love. The same facility they have for satisfying their desire leaves them lazy and weak. They may be masters over the rest, but remain slaves to their own weaknesses. The ideal condition is a lot of energy, perfect control, and sobriety. But in practice, more work is required than talent. There is no general rule, and in the final analysis, results are determined not by initial energy levels, but by individual effort. It should be mentioned, while speaking of energy, that we must determine past and present uses of our energy and whether or not the two are connected. On one hand, how much energy was I born with, and how have I utilized it all my life? On the other, how am I currently using my energy, and what changes can I make? One conclusion we can draw from the second question is that no one is condemned by the conditions of birth or past. We can change the use of our energy, restore it, or increase it. Determining the past. The form in which an ordinary person utilizes energy is not a product of chance or of choice. Rather, it is determined by his or her past. Although we modern people like very much to consider ourselves free, in reality, our possibilities of making a free choice are limited to only a very small part of our actions. Putting aside for the moment all functions and activities connected with biological conditioning, we find that the total remaining actions are determined entirely by personal history, social class, nationality, sex, personality, religion, political ideology, complexes, and traumas are only some examples of the many details that make up our personal history, thereby determining the what and the how of our daily existence. In reality, when we believe that we decide, we are doing nothing more than setting in motion actions that have already been programmed into us by our past. Exactly like a machine that does only operations for which it was designed. Thus are determined our beliefs, desires, choices, limitations, weaknesses, and talents. We don't choose with whom we talk or with whom we have relations, the places we frequent or those we avoid. Behind it all is our personal history, which is expressed through the structure of ego. Ego and personal history are intimately related insofar as the first is the functional expression of the second. It is ego that daily compels us to sustain our personal history and act according to its dictates. Through this, said history is renewed and the resulting ego self-confirmed. We can only select from the options contained within the narrow limits set by the projection of our personal history through time. From this, we can conclude that the use of our energy as average people, the totality of our actions, in other words, responds to a determination from our past in which the will normally does not intervene. Suffice it to say that the daily use of our energy in this manner is often very consuming and hardly gratifying, as we can see by merely looking at the expressions on people's faces in the street, in the subway, or trapped in their cars in a typical big city traffic jam. Hunting power. Although normally men and women consume all of their energy performing the routines dictated by their personal history, it is possible for them to make the following fundamental changes in their condition as fields of energy: redirect energy, save energy, increase energy. The possibility of redirecting energy seemingly contradicts what was established earlier, that our energy use is already predetermined by our past. If the use of our energy is predetermined, then how can this be changed? In reality, such a change is possible, although rare. The contradiction is resolved in practice. Practice begins with the form of specialized conduct, actions that from the point of view of the ego are completely out of the ordinary. We might call them purposeful acts or not doings in no way connected to our past, which have the effect of opening little by little our field of possibilities. Through persisting in the performance of unusual acts, we create a disruption in the habitual patterns of our energy use. And as a consequence, they begin to loosen. Once this loosening process begins, we are in a better position to redirect the energy formerly spent in consuming activities toward new, much more worthwhile pursuits. In the moment we direct part of our energy toward less wasteful uses, an excess of energy is generated, which, in its turn, permits us to advance even more toward the redirection of our energy. This begins to express itself through the gradual increase of aspects of our life that pass from the realm of the impossible to the possible. Giving up smoking or drinking, letting go of anger, taking time to listen to the songs of the trees or the messages of the birds. If we are persistent, our field of living and perceptual possibilities widens until the tendency to act in accordance with our personal history disappears. At this point, a person can be said to have erased personal history and is therefore free from its influence. All of these changes are made possible, of course, by a certain level of energy. Change cannot occur without it. If we understand this, it will be apparent that for any new action to take place, we must find a way to increase our energy. This could be done by eliminating our most energy-consuming routines, then applying the energy saved to actions outside of those routines. However, if we occupy ourselves only with the redirection of energy without making an effort to save or increase it, we will achieve only limited results. The increase in personal power or available energy would appear to be the key to the whole matter, but nevertheless, it is not, at least not in principle. Having come this far, we can see why it is not possible to undertake any unfamiliar or new action without having the necessary available energy for it. Since all of our energy is already apportioned out in accordance with the dictates of personal history, where can we obtain any extra energy? The obvious and immediate answer would be from the sun and the earth, our fundamental sources of energy supply. However, our relation to the sun and the earth is also determined by our personal history and is limited almost exclusively to the energy obtained through nutrition. We know that simply eating more will not give us more energy, although a better quality diet would help. We generally do not know that there are other ways besides eating in which to obtain energy from the sun and the earth. We can also obtain additional energy directly from them through special exercises. Many cultures of non-European tradition have known and still know diverse procedures or rituals for achieving increased energy. Although I am familiar with some of these procedures, they will be presented in the following chapters. I must point out that they are useless if we do not have the necessary available energy to utilize them as true connectors with the source. If we wish to have more energy, we must first have some energy available. This is what Jesus of Nazareth meant when he said, "For unto everyone that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. but from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. Again, we have a contradiction. This, however, will all be explained when we take into account the difference, already discussed briefly, having to do with energy. The difference between plain energy and energy that is available. We know that people possess varying amounts of energy. We also know that as average persons, all of our energy is consumed by the routines of everyday life. All of it. If we could somehow have more energy than we use, or simply use less than our normal amount, we would obtain then a supply of free or available energy. This energy could properly be called personal power, or that which is needed to perform actions outside personal history, including the gathering of energy directly from the sun or the earth, to live a freer life. If in order to accumulate energy, we must have a supply of available energy, how can we obtain this primal energy? The answer is, we can save it. That's it. The way for human beings to obtain free energy is to save what they already have by not spending it on the routines of everyday life. The method is simple, but its effects are far-reaching. If we suspend some of our internal or external repetitive actions, the energy thus liberated becomes available energy, which we can use to enter into the unknown, that which lies outside the dictates of personal history. However, not all the actions of life can be suspended, and among those that can, not all are energy wasting. This is why warriors make an inventory of energy expenditures. That allows them to know, through the technique of stalking, how they use their energy, and later to plan a strategy for redirecting its use. Thereby, they increase their available energy. From this inventory, apprentices can choose from their everyday activities, those that are not indispensable for life and that are particularly wasteful and destructive, anti-energetic, to work for their temporal or definitive removal. Procedures for this will be outlined in the section on techniques. Naturally, effective suspension of our compulsive actions resulting from the force of personal history is dependent on having the necessary energy. This is particularly true in relation to habits, whether they be nutritional, emotional, psychological, or spiritual. In practice, it can happen that the chosen activities, whose wasteful nature makes them appropriate for the practice of saving energy, are sometimes difficult to stop. We cannot stop them because we lack the necessary energy. There is a way out of this apparently hopeless situation. It has to do with using what I call the minimum space of personal freedom. This minimum space of freedom constitutes areas of our lives, seemingly of little significance, in which it is possible to act purposefully outside of personal history. As average people, we cannot, of course, immediately suspend such habits as smoking, anger, or self-pity. We can, however, change small things, such as our sleeping position, or perhaps sleep on the floor. We can, for instance, observe for 2 weeks our first thought upon waking in the morning, and our last thought before going to sleep at night. If we discover, as is usually the case, that they have a negative influence on our energy, then during the next 2 weeks, we could intentionally change those thoughts and think something different. Working with an inventory of energy expenditures, it is possible to discover many small activities that allow us, right from the beginning, to save energy. Once this process has begun, the energy thus saved allows us to amplify our efforts to include a wider range of habits that were inaccessible earlier, precisely due to a lack of energy. In this way, energy brings energy. Examples of energy-consuming habits include smoking, alcoholism, arguing, oversleeping, excessive thinking, judging others, criticism, condemning, complaining, identification with violent fantasies, such as those seen on television, movies, or in the newspaper. Two examples that deserve separate mention are emotions and self-importance. These represent the two fundamental ways in which we consume our energy, and as we will see, they are generally related. Emotions. I will make a distinction between emotion and feeling at this point. This is much simpler than we might suppose. Feelings are a natural reaction to what we perceive, while emotions are the product, not of perception, but of thought, of reason, which generally in the average person is not very reasonable. Feelings are not energy consuming. Emotions are to a high degree. Our basic feelings of sorrow and joy arise from our simply being in the world. The body, for example, when it glimpses its final destiny, lets us know in the form of sadness or melancholy, which is neither painful nor energy wasting, but instead cures us of pettiness and restores our equilibrium. In a like manner, true joy comes from a place of deep inside, not provoked artificially through jokes or comedy, and arises not through reason, but through the direct perception of something that makes us joyful. We don't have to think to feel joy upon seeing newborn life, a hummingbird sipping from a flower, or a tree dancing with the wind, upon receiving a caress or an embrace. Emotions, on the other hand, arise not from perception, but from thought. They cannot be produced if we are without thoughts. Unfortunately, since we relegate perception to second place, our emotions put us in the situation of being able to manage our reality in a sensible way only with difficulty. Typical examples of emotion are wrath, jealousy, rancor, envy, self-pity, self-destructive depression. None of these emotions can be produced without the appropriate thoughts to accompany them. Who can become angry without thinking first? Nobody. In order to become angry, we have to tell ourselves that what someone did to us was unjust, that we deserve better, or something similar. If any readers have trouble believing this, then try to make yourselves angry without words or thoughts. Consider the example of the lover who feels jealous when he observes his girlfriend talking and smiling with another man. Here are the simple facts. There is a woman, his girlfriend, talking with a man, a stranger, and she smiles. Are these simple facts what produces the energy-wasting emotion of jealousy? No. The lover, beginning with his personal history, perhaps he has seen too many movies, heard too many love songs on the radio, or witnessed the lack of love between his parents. Upon seeing his girlfriend conversing and smiling, begins compulsively to talk to himself. She has no reason to cheat on me. I should be the only person capable of making her smile. I never cheat on her, at least not so blatantly. She doesn't respect me. It is this type of thinking, not the facts themselves, that provokes the painful and energy-consuming experience of jealousy. It does not matter if in reality the woman is talking to her cousin or a friend, or in fact has another lover. The jealousy emanates only from the imagination of the jealous boyfriend. Once submerged in an emotional tidal wave, reality recedes further and further from us. The more we talk to ourselves, the less we perceive, and so on. So far from reality, how can we hope to handle it? We can become violent, making it easy to finish off the last traces of love or beauty that otherwise would have been present, and we still feel ourselves the victim. This is how we waste our energy. This is why it is worth the struggle to become a warrior. Like the rest of our everyday actions, emotions are repetitive and are determined by personal history. Thus, everyone has his or her own emotional habits, each of which constitutes a personal way of wasting energy and of weakening the self. It is not difficult to discover, if we make a careful examination, that the conflicts and emotional problems of our lives manifest themselves in endless cyclical repetitions. Even if we change people and places, the problems are repeated time and time again. This applies to all the emotions. They are pernicious and they create themselves. Now we know a secret that, if applied practically, becomes a treasure of incalculable value. Emotions cannot be produced without thoughts. What is more, they cannot be produced without the appropriate thoughts. This puts us into direct contact with the way of saving energy. Should we find ourselves on the edge of an emotional, agitated state, we simply enter into a state of inner silence, and the emotion cannot then take place. If this alternative is not yet within our grasp, we can try changing the content of the internal dialogue. We can make a song using our thoughts for the words. Put them in the form of a rhyme. Think backwards, or in a foreign language. Go through the multiplication tables, or sing a nursery song. In each case, the results will be the same. Without the appropriate thoughts, the emotion cannot be produced. Self-importance. Although in this chapter we will not be dealing directly with self-importance or ways to diminish or eliminate it, a few comments are nevertheless in order here, since, according to what the inventory of energy expenditures shows us, it generally consumes over 90% of our total energy, while giving nothing in return, save perhaps illness, loneliness, weakness, and poor quality of life in general. In effect, a large part of our personal energy is spent on activities related to self-importance that go far beyond vanity alone. Self-importance is the particular form in which our ego assembles and maintains its reality for its own self-confirmation and to convince itself it's real. Without going into great detail at this time, we will look at some ordinary activities related to self-importance. The most extensive activities have to do with defense of the ego. Let us consider how much energy we consume. How much is spent in defending ourselves, in caring for our self-image, in trying to influence the opinion that others have of us, in trying to be accepted, in defending ourselves against the criticism of others, in trying to demonstrate that we are the best, or that we are worth nothing, that we are the most beautiful, or the strongest, or the most miserable, most misunderstood, most sensitive, most cruel, most hurt, always the most something. How much importance we give ourselves. We live chained to what Castaneda calls the mirror of self-reflection, one of whose principal characteristics is the self-image we project toward other people. And to this self-image goes the major part of our energy. Therefore, eradicating, or at least diminishing self-importance becomes a fundamental objective of a warrior, particularly the stalker. This process has nothing to do with morality. A warrior is not guided by moral abstraction, but by impeccability. He or she is a field of energy and proceeds in accordance with that fact. Although self-importance is a fundamental area relating to the saving of energy, the struggle and the techniques used to combat it represent the first of the not doings of the personal self and will be explained in a separate section. Everything that applies to human beings in relation to personal power applies to all living beings, since they are all fields of energy. Don Juan often referred to the existence of magical animals whose magic made them practically invulnerable. They were not likely to be captured by hunters. Their power was derived from the fact that, unlike ordinary animals, they had no routines. This endowed them with lightness, freedom, and extraordinary power. He said it would be fortunate indeed to encounter one of these beings. So, in effect, the principle of personal power operates among animals as well. We could say that animals with good luck are those that have more energy. They live more intense and complete lives than their fellows. The same holds true for plants and other living beings. The energy of a tree, for instance, can be so powerful that simply resting in its shade or among its branches will produce a great, generally beneficent effect. In the same way, what happens among plants and animals also occurs among humans. Those who achieve a life free of routines and who have a high degree of energy transform themselves by right into magical beings who, at the least, do not follow the rules that govern the lives of the average person. Rather, they rule their lives, destinies, and circumstances by this special power that is at their service, but that they also inexorably must serve. Techniques. All that has been mentioned so far provides the basis for a nearly unlimited number of practical possibilities. However, before proceeding, I wish to make the following suggestion. The basic order in which these techniques can be practiced is, first, from the perspective of saving energy, then of redirecting it, and lastly, of increasing it. In order to save energy, we must begin to understand how and on what we normally spend it, which will allow us later to formulate a strategy for saving it. Therefore, an inventory is the first technique we must practice as a foundation for all the rest. Number 1, make an inventory of energy expenditures. The general idea is to make a list that permits us to answer this question: on what do I spend my energy? A general answer would be that we spend it on all that we do, both internally and externally. Therefore, our inventory should consist of a list of all of our daily actions. This is not an exercise of mental analysis or a reflexive process, which would simply be the ego giving a report about itself, justifying itself in the process, and therefore not yielding an accurate picture of reality. This is the exercise of stalking, which is based on observation. It could be useful, however, to respond to the energy question by mental analysis, simply to see which method gives us a more accurate picture of reality. The following materials will be required: pen or pencil and a notebook. Some kind of previously chosen signal, such as an alarm, that will call your attention at various intervals. Or you could have someone give the signal verbally. Or you could remember every time you pass through a doorway, or any other signal that will wake you up at intervals and is more or less constant. In the following exercise, I will assume you are using a watch with an alarm. Now perform the following steps. Number 1, divide the pages of the notebook into 3 columns, heading them with the following questions in this order. What was I thinking? What was I doing? Is this what I want to do? Number 2, set the watch to sound every 15 minutes. Or if the effect of the exercise is too strong, set it for every 30 minutes. It should go off at times other than on the hour, making it more unlikely that you will be able to anticipate the alarm. Number 3, each time the alarm sounds, observe yourself in that moment and then respond in your notebook to the 3 questions. Don't analyze, simply record what you observe. The answers should be brief and concise. Also note the time of the observation. Obviously, the questions refer to the moment prior to that of recording the answers. Try to answer them on the spot. Number 4, before going to sleep, review what you wrote down during the day and respond in writing on a separate sheet of paper to the following questions. Were my thoughts varied or repetitive? What were the most often reoccurring elements in my thoughts? Were my actions varied or repetitive? Which ones were the most repetitive? Was there a relation between my thoughts and my actions? What percentage of my actions had anything to do with what I really wanted to do? Answering these questions from the point of view of stalking will give you an idea of how you used your energy that day. Number 5, repeat the procedure every day for 1 week. Then review the answers given to the 3 questions at the end of each day, using them to respond to the questions from step 4, but applying them to the entire week. This will show how you spent your energy during that week. Number 6, repeat the procedure for 4 weeks. Then again, review your weekly answers, using these answers to respond to the questions in step 4, but applying them to the entire month. This shows how you used your energy during that month. Number 7, with that information, make the most detailed list possible of external actions, activities, routines, physical habits, addictions, etc., and internal experiences, repetitive thoughts, emotional habits, illnesses, state of being, etc., that make up your life. The resulting list becomes your inventory of energy expenditures. Number 8, divide the elements of the list into 2 columns. That which is indispensable to sustain life, eating, sleeping, breathing, etc. That which is not indispensable to sustain life, anger, criticism, jogging, drawing, etc. Number 9, divide the elements from the second column into 2 more columns. That which makes me feel well and or that which I consider to be in my best interest to continue doing. Sports, arts, a job that I like, making love, etc. That which does not make me feel well and or is not in my best interest to continue doing. Reading the crime page in the newspaper, watching violence on television or in the movies, discussing illnesses, smoking, drinking, excessive talking, becoming angry, self-pity, trying to be accepted, etc. Number 10, divide the elements from the second column of step 9 into 2 more columns. That which is not possible to eliminate, that which can be eliminated either without difficulty or by making a small effort. Number 11, select from the second column in step 10 a few elements that you consider appropriate and, during a specific period, cease to perform them. Immediately, the energy that was formerly used for these acts will be converted into extra energy. At the end of your chosen period, decide whether you want to prolong the exercise indefinitely or suspend it. Commentary on the technique. The act of observing tends to provoke very acute states of attention, known as states of heightened awareness, that can have many distinct levels. We should not be frightened by them, since they are very useful. Remember that the exercise of observation has to do with registering facts, not analyzing them. So be as coldly objective as possible when answering the questions. It is a general condition for most people to have repetitious thoughts and habits around which their lives are centered. The modification of these would imply a complete change of life experience. The criteria we use to define what is indispensable or what makes us feel well is highly subjective. Therefore, we should use our own criteria without too much worry. To choose the actions to suspend, we can start with the easiest or with the most energy consuming. It all depends on how intensely we are willing to work. It is important to determine beforehand the exact length of time a given activity is to be suspended, and it is best to make it short in the beginning. It is too taxing psychologically to think of quitting something forever. To leave it for a few days is much easier. It also permits us to periodically evaluate our results and to decide whether or not to continue with the task. Number 2, technique for determining the energetic quality of your acts. Take a few moments to observe your body and sensations, or your spirit. After performing an act whose energetic quality you wish to know, the answer will be clear. If you feel good, vigorous, happy, and full, the act is energizing. If you feel weak, spent, out of sorts, and empty, the act is energy consuming. Commentary on the technique. In spite of its apparent simplicity, this technique can have far-reaching effects. These effects are never met with in ordinary life because normally we do not make an effort to observe ourselves, stalking, to obtain the information. Again, no analysis is required, only observation of what we feel. All acts require the use of energy. Some even tend to function perfectly to the point of increasing energy. They constitute, therefore, an appropriate use of energy, providing many benefits. Others only consume energy, causing us damage. Number 3, references for determining your energy level at birth. The exact method for determining the energy level you were born with is done through the exercise of recapitulation, which will be dealt with in another section. Nevertheless, you can get a general idea of it by briefly reviewing your past. Following are some indications to help determine this level. They can serve only as general guidelines, not as hard and fast rules. High energy, restless child, curious, investigative, invents own games, popular with other children, a natural leader, independent child, does not need permission to act, attracted to the unknown, a doer as an adolescent, involved in own projects, precocious in love, learned early to make money, popular with friends and with the opposite sex, healthy, left home early, lucky, successful. Low energy, timid child, asks permission for everything, tied to mother, afraid of everything, a follower, not a leader, sickly, lazy as an adolescent, thinks a lot, rarely acts, little success with the opposite sex, never leaves home, must be thrown out, late in seeking employment, oriented toward failure, unlucky. Commentary on the technique. Naturally, none of us is totally energetic or anti-energetic, as these lists would tend to suggest. Rather, we find some characteristics in both columns. Predominance of one over the other gives us a general idea of our energy level. People's energy levels vary according to how they have utilized it throughout their lives. Number 4, techniques for stopping emotions or debilitating thoughts. To stop debilitating emotions such as anger or jealousy is a simple procedure, but it requires discipline and a minimum amount of available energy. The key lies in our thoughts, the prerequisite for the production of an energy-consuming emotion. This technique works for any type of debilitating emotion. There are 2 different techniques for this exercise. The first involves stopping the internal dialogue, and the second, for those who yet do not have the necessary energy, involves its modification. The search for inner silence. Practice any of the techniques contained in the section on stopping the internal dialogue, Chapter 6. Modification. Change your debilitating thoughts into any of the following forms, or invent your own. Without changing the content of your thoughts, make an effort to form them into a rhyme. Make a song using the contents of your thoughts. Think backward. Think in a foreign language that is unfamiliar to you. Assign a number to each letter of each word of your thoughts, then add them up to determine the numerical result of your thoughts. Go through the multiplication tables. Recite a prayer from a religion that is not your own. Try to imitate the form of a well-known comic using the content of your thoughts as the material. Number 5, technique for saving energy and well-being. Practice strictly for a period of 3 days or more this golden rule. Don't criticize. Don't condemn. Don't complain. Once the period is over, either begin another or wait a while before beginning again. Number 6, technique of silence. Given that much energy is consumed in talking, stopping this activity can be very beneficial, especially for those who love to talk. Continue activity and interaction with other persons, talkers or not, during the execution of this exercise. Number 7, saving sexual energy. Sexual activity is a natural part of our existence, and normally human beings are born with enough energy to be sexually active for their entire lives. Or more or less prolonged abstinence of part or all of our sexual activities can be an effective method for saving energy, principally because of the high grade of energy involved in sex. Commentary on the technique. Sexual relations are not debilitating in themselves. What are debilitating are the things attached to the sex act, particularly in the Western world. Violence, repression, and guilt are some of the elements that can make a sexual encounter a negative, energy-consuming experience. Energetically speaking, abstinence is better than debilitating sexual encounters. And healthy sexual activity is better than abstinence. The latter can open the way to increased perception and awareness, apart from the enjoyment that it implies. Experiencing sexuality outside the ego and the mind can open the way to the unknown parts of our being and of reality. However, for this to occur, we must be free of obsessive desire. A distinction should be made here between obsessive desire and natural desire. The first is a debilitating habit motivated by the internalization of the sick attitudes of our society toward sex. Natural desire, on the other hand, is a healthy impulse that motivates us to look for fusion in the mystery of the other person, beyond mind and structured experience. However, for this to occur, we must be free of obsessive desire and guilt, both shackles that social hypocrisy uses to keep our bodies and hearts in chains. Number 8, capturing energy from the sun. In order for this technique to be effective, we must possess a certain amount of available energy and know how to choose the appropriate moment to create a connection. Described here is a basic technique mentioned by Don Carlos, the practice of which, with some variation, I have observed among indigenous peoples in Mexico. Capturing the energy of twilight. The moment in which day and night come together had a high significance for Don Juan, since, as far as energy is concerned, it is a very appropriate moment in which to capture energy from the sun. The technique is effective for sunset as well as for sunrise, but it usually functions better if we choose the one we are more naturally attuned to, according to the nature of our spirit. Personally, I prefer sunrise, although my first experience was with the sunset. Number 1, begin in a standing position. If practicing at dawn, you must begin before sunrise. If in the evening, a little before sunset. Look for a wide open area in which to have a clear view of the sun. Direct your gaze toward the sun, relaxed and attentive. Your arms are relaxed at your sides, palms facing toward the sun. Your breathing is deep and concentrated. Number 2, at the moment of sunrise, begin to trot smoothly in place, being careful to deliberately increase your breathing as you increase your bodily movement. As the sun rises, so does the intensity of movement and respiration. Raise your arms little by little with the palms toward the sun, concentrating on the sensation of heat. Your movements become more intense as the sun climbs higher. When it is completely above the horizon, your arms should be extended in front of you, palms completely open toward the sun in an attitude of receiving energy. At this point, your legs should be moving at maximum speed with your knees raising as high as possible. This exercise should be prolonged until it is finished, which is understood to be any type of corporal notice, such as a sensation of catharsis, an internal explosion, total exhaustion, a burning sensation without pain, ecstasy, or any other climactic experience. Stop at this point and remain where you are until respiration and vital functions return to normal. Commentary on the technique. This technique may appear strange in our modern age, but far from being an indigenous extravagance or something similar. It makes use of universal processes in which the human body, as a field of energy, establishes a peculiar form of relationship with the source, the sun, or the earth. Phenomena of this nature can even at times be produced spontaneously. An example of this is the first time it happened to me without a deliberate plan. I was driving on the highway in the desert of southern Baja California, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest town. The sun, high overhead, produced a stifling heat, mitigated only slightly by the air flowing through the open windows of the car. I stopped to relieve myself, a physiological necessity after many hours behind the wheel. I had hardly left my car when a peculiar sensation took hold of me. I heard the murmur of the desert. Although I had spent hours traveling through it, music from the tape deck, as well as the strain of driving, had minimized the effect of the singular force emanating from its desolate places. Once relieved of my urgency, I was ready to resume my journey. I still had more than 250 miles to go that day to reach the next whale sanctuary. In spite of my hurry, I paused for a moment to look around me. The sound of the desert is like none other. It gives the impression of a vibrating silence. The intensity of the sun was suddenly diminished by some high-altitude clouds. Everything took on a blue-gray hue. The vegetation around me consisted of low bushes and cactus typical of the desert. Far to the west, the distant mountains took on a dark blue color, but I was unable to determine whether they had vegetation or not. It occurred to me that hiking to those mountains would make an interesting excursion, walking in the middle of the desert. At that moment, however, I had neither the time, knowledge of the region, nor adequate footwear to make the journey. It was just wishful thinking on my part. I turned to go back to my car. Then something surprising happened. I became disoriented for a moment. My body began to walk toward the mountains, while my ego, contemplating this new turn of events, asked, so you are going for a walk in the desert after all? You know there's no time. Besides, it could be dangerous. To which another part of me replied, only for a while, just to take a little stroll. Meanwhile, without paying any attention to this monologue of my mind, my body kept on walking. As I was walking, a kind of comforting heat took hold of me. It made me feel secure and at peace. The sweat of my body was refreshing. The mountains remained as far away as ever. I knew I wouldn't be able to reach them. And with that knowledge, I was able to keep on walking without worry, thinking that I could return to my car any time I liked. As a result of the work that my body was doing, I eventually reached a point where my ego was silenced. When I stopped talking, nothing mattered, only walking for the joy of walking. The mountains now appeared closer, Thoughts began to return again for short moments, saying that the mountains were still far away and there was no need to reach them. At one moment, I looked back for my car and it had disappeared, along with the highway. Then, the silence took hold of me again, and I kept on walking. I felt the fascination of the desert, and as I walked, I was transformed into nature. I was not moved by any impulse. I simply found myself there, and the only thing I could do was to walk. With each step, the mountains attracted me more and more, growing in size as I approached. I did not know if I would be able to reach them, but since it didn't matter whether I arrived or not, I kept on walking. Just one step more, just one step more. The diminishing sunlight made me aware of the passage of time. It was almost dusk when I found myself at the foot of one of the mountains. It appeared very high, and from where I was standing, formed an enormous, almost vertical cliff composed of a soft, unstable type of rock that crumbled very easily. I had arrived after all, without having made a conscious decision to do so. I had accomplished what hours before I had thought impossible. I thought, well, now that I am here, I will climb just a little to have a better view of the countryside. I began to climb, or to be more precise, to scale the rock wall, feeling as though I were a puma in its natural habitat. A feverish anxiety took hold of me. I knew something awaited me up there, and I felt the need to reach the top before dark. I did not know what I was looking for, but the impulse was very clear. The hours of walking in the desert had put me in a very receptive state of increased sensitivity, and I knew, without the use of my reason, which in this moment would only have served to terrify me anyway, what I had to do. Now and then I looked down and saw how high I had climbed. One error, one false step, and I would never leave this place alive. Nevertheless, I felt happy, my body more awake with each step. I arrived at the top of the enormous wall and discovered that beyond it lay the true summit, invisible from the base. The distance to it was greater, but its slope was much less steep. Without thinking, I began to run toward it. I reached the summit just at twilight. I had a few moments to contemplate the world, the solitude, and the free reign of nature, very far from the world of human affairs. In front of me, beyond the enormous desert, I could see the Sea of Cortez. Turning around, I saw more desert and the Pacific Ocean. I felt as though I were on top, not of the everyday world, but a magical and mysterious world that was peaceful and harmonious, and at the same time, potent and powerful. I became aware of my insignificance in this immensity. I knew that I was neither more or less important than everything that surrounded me, and I felt happy. I recalled the concerns of my everyday world, and they seemed small in the face of this vastness. I turned toward the sunset. The world took on a dark blue coloration, within which the sky, sea, earth, and my own heart were fused together. Suddenly, I felt something well up from the earth under my feet, come up through my legs and spine to my head, like a ticklish sensation or an electric current, a tension that obliged me to move. The energy increased in an intensity, as did the speed of my movements. The earth was teaching me a secret. Without any conscious plan on my part, I found myself frenetically running in place, with my arms extended and my hands open, palms toward the sun, raising my thighs in an uncontrollable tremor. Tears ran down my face. The world turned red. Something burst inside me, and I felt liberated. I knew the next step of my task in this world, and I felt complete. The mysterious had opened a window, and I had taken a look at my destiny. I accepted it with joy. In the darkness, full of energy, with a kind of light emanating from my body, I descended the mountain and walked back across the enormous desert to my car.